Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Samantha Marshall. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations for the University of Toledo Alumni Office. I want to thank all of you for being here this evening. I also want to thank those of us that are tuning in at home on their computers on this event. We are very excited to be able to live stream this program this evening. We're very excited about the topic of LGBTQ youth and suicide risk, and look forward to hearing some great information this evening. I'm going to kick off this program very quickly. I'm going to start by introducing to you Kristen Blachowski, who is both a practitioner and educator of law and justice studies. Kristen has been a law, criminal investigation, self-defense, and communications instructor for the past 20 years at both the high school and college levels. She was a federal agent with the FBI. I'm not scared or anything, but and served as an Ohio peace officer for 15 years for the Lucas County Sheriff and as a White House police officer. Kristen is also a two-time alumna of the University of Toledo, including a JD degree. Go Rockets. She is currently an assistant professor of sociology and justice studies at Lord University, co-chair of the Northwest Ohio GLSEN chapter, and serves on the Lucas County Suicide Coalition. Please join me in welcoming Kristen.
See some faces that I know, which will make me a little more comfortable. I'd be fine if I knew we weren't streaming this. Just speaking to you all would be fine, but thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. Much of the work that I do is advocating in the criminal justice system, and I also work supporting individuals with mental health, and I work with LGBTQ youth. And if stigma would just be able to be eradicated, most of my work would be done. I wouldn't have to do it. Stigma causes individuals to hide part of their story for fear of how others will judge them and label them. And this often leads to social exclusion. However, many individuals also turn their stigma inward and they internalize those labels. They deal with issues alone to maintain their secret, whether it's a mental health issue or what it is, and stigma causes exclusion and isolation, and research shows that social isolation is one of the main risk factors associated with suicidal outcomes. So how can we get people to understand, to get rid of that stigma? I realized that it was right in front of me a long time ago, and that is education. So education can change attitudes, erase stigma, and it's powerful. But as powerful as it can also cause negative outcomes for students. And unfortunately, some of our schools lack understanding of their role with the LGBTQ student population, and often are unaware that these youth are at a greater risk for mental health issues and an increased rate of suicide. One thing that many educators are also unaware of is parental rejection. And this happens quite frequently when LGBTQ youth disclose their status to their family. LGBTQ youth, I need a drink now, who come from highly rejected families are 8.5 times as likely to have suicide attempts as their peers who reported no or low levels of family rejection. This is important to know, as students without home support often see school as their safe space where they can get the support that they are not getting at home. However, that is not the case with our LGBTQ student population many times. Educators are great people who do so much for their students. However, as a result of a lack of general knowledge, we see problems that indicate that the one thing that all human beings need, inclusion and a sense of belonging, is often absent for that population. I'm with GLSEN, and GLSEN performs a national school survey that's done every 2 years. And they ask questions to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer youth to see what they are experiencing in our schools. And this is a 6 through 12 survey. For the last 20 years, there's been steady progress. Unfortunately, this last survey showed that the progress has slowed. So I don't become political, I will not say why, but you all know. Okay, and this is impacting the students in Ohio. Some of the issues that our LGBTQ youth are exposed to are, first, administrators and teachers sometimes allow bullying behavior to occur in the schools. They also oftentimes implement school rules in a discriminatory manner. Our survey indicates that 90% of students regularly heard gay used in a negative way. 83% heard negative remarks about gender expression. Some regularly heard staff make remarks. More than half of these individuals did not report anything, including other types of harassment, victimization, and of that half that didn't report, those who did, only 29% had effective staff intervention. With regard to the implementation of school rules in a discriminatory manner, I saw this as a high school teacher. Public displays of affection were stopped more frequently with students that were LGBTQ than for non-students. In addition, they often were not allowed to wear apparel that reflected their pride. They often had other dress code issues that were addressed, such as wearing clothing that was considered inappropriate for their gender, and oftentimes other dress code issues with other students were ignored. So, second major issue that we see is that schools do not have inclusive and affirming policies, including anti-bullying policy that specifically lists LGBTQ youth. LGBTQ students in Ohio were often not included in these policies. Less than 1 in 10 say their schools included them. A lot of times the schools just say, we don't need to. They are incorporated in our general policies and there's no need to single them out. So as I was thinking about that, I was kind of thinking that's like our Black Lives Matters when people say all lives matter. It's a similar analogy. We need to include the LGBT students because they are the ones having a very serious issue right now. Also, there's a lack of policy when dealing with transgender students. Most youths reported being unable to use the restroom aligned with their gender due to no policy existing. They were unable to use their chosen names or pronouns. They couldn't bring LGBT students couldn't bring a same-gender date to a dance, and the transgender students also had issues with playing sports. Just a a few months ago, I had a faculty member call me to say that a school had refused to use a student's chosen name, and it was just a little thing that kind of crushed the student and caused more isolation and that internalized stigma just because they didn't want to say the word Jessica. So, our third major issue is that teachers are not using inclusive curriculum and resources that use positive LGBTQ examples. They're also not being included in sex education. Less than 1 in 5 were taught positive representation in history or positive role models. 20% of the students actually reported having negative content taught to them. And less than 3% had inclusive sex education. The last item is that many schools do not have, nor do they support, a GSA, Gay-Straight Alliance. This allows students to have a peer group and adult support that helps to limit that isolation. Research has shown that LGBT students hear fewer homophobic slurs, have a much better school environment overall, experience less harassment, better attendance, and feel safer at schools with GSAs. Additionally, many schools feel that they have a right to tell the students that they cannot have one. And I don't think they realize that the Federal Equal Access Act says that they have to allow them to form non-curricular clubs, basically if they allow other clubs to exist by the students. I read something a couple weeks ago about this, was that this law was actually instigated by religious organizations to allow students to form clubs like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I did not realize that. So, to many of us, this seems unimaginable that these things are still happening in our schools. Schools are often afraid of the community and parental reactions, and they really are receiving little direction from the law on these issues, and even less from our federal government. As a result, we're kind of relying on the schools to act morally and in the best interest of their students. And truly, in my heart, I believe that educators want to help their students. They want to act in the best interest of their students. But those 4 things that I discussed really need to be changed. The main ways we can do this are providing professional development for all school staff, everyone, so that they can learn things like terminology, that they don't even understand the basics of the words they should use. And then also the things like we're going to learn today about the suicide risk that these students have. We need to implement supportive and inclusive school policies, including comprehensive anti-bullying and harassment. And we need to have supportive transgender and gender non-conforming student policies. We need to increase LGBTQ inclusive curricular resources and support our GSAs, support the schools in having the students form these. With these few changes, our LGBTQ students can have higher success rates in school, greater mental health outcomes, and decreased suicide rates. There is no reason that in 2019, this segment of our school population is still dealing with disrespect from other students and adults in the school setting. The educational setting needs to take the lead in erasing stigma. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much for the information that you provided. I didn't mention at the beginning of the presentation, but as most of you know, this program is sponsored by our new alumni affiliate, the LGBTQA plus alumni affiliate at the University of Toledo Alumni Association. And all of the goals and things that you mentioned in your presentation are things that we want to help accomplish, such as professional development and providing programming and education and just opportunities for our UT alumni and friends to help the Toledo community. And hopefully by doing things such as this that is live streamed, we can really help push this information out to the masses. So thank you so much for being here with us this evening. It is now my pleasure to introduce a longtime advocate for equality and human rights, Annalise Alvarez. Born and raised in Santa Barbara, California, I'm not jealous at all. Annalise has been an educator for nearly 2 decades with experience at secondary and university levels. She holds a Bachelor of Music from USC and a Master of Music from Northern Arizona University. In 2015, she decided to pursue a doctorate in Educational Administration and Supervision at the University of Toledo, where she is a graduate assistant for the Judith Herb College of Education and the Rocket Marching Band. Now a doctoral candidate, she is currently working along LGBTQA communities in Ohio and serving as the Executive Director of Equality Toledo. Where do you find time? I don't know. You will see her this spring at our spring graduate commencement ceremony in more roles than one. Please join me in welcoming Annalise Alvarez.
Good evening. I'll start with a retort that's not on my script. All the things that's happening now, including, I call this dissertation eyes, I am still significantly less busy than as a high school band director. So let me just throw that out there. If you don't know, thank your high school band directors, because they're usually on campuses longer, more hours than administrators. So significantly less busy. This is so easy. Juggling all this is a breeze. And now what I meant to be here to say. So while I'm here as an advocate for and to represent Equality Toledo as its executive director, I'd like to take a moment to talk about my career in education. I was a high school teacher for 15 years in Southern California and Nevada, and worked to make schools safe for all students. I was an advisor of a Gay Straight Alliance at both schools that I worked at. I was a volunteer with the Gay and Lesbian Center of Los Angeles and was co-chair of GLSEN Southern Nevada. And some of the things I'm going to say is going to mirror what you just heard, but I get my data from GLSEN too. So, but right now I'm working very hard to finish the doctorate in educational administration, again, doctorate eyes, at UT. But I signed a contract a couple days ago and can officially say that this fall I get to step back into education as an administrator. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you. And I'm really excited to continue the work that we're here to discuss and learn about, which is the issues of bullying and harassment of LGBTQ students in our schools. So I have somewhat of a confession to make first. I am not a fan of the use of the term bullying. Generally think it's overused. And so while we have a very clear definition and a legal definition of bullying, it's just become this catchphrase or an easy place to blame issues of harassment and violence, or whether it's verbal or physical. It's become a place to easily point fingers, and it's become popularized by its overuse. So we end up having trouble in schools trying to decipher if it's a single incident of harassment or if it's actually bullying. And I think that's one place where schools struggle, particularly our local schools who are grossly misinformed about LGBTQ issues. So in order to identify where bullying is bullying, we need to have better and more specific language when kids are harassed or abused or mistreated or a victim of some sort of incident. Then we need to make sure there's a safe place on these campuses for them to report these events and that they are handled correctly by the school system so that unchecked harassment doesn't turn into systematic bullying. So when it comes to LGBTQ youth, however, all of these are one and the same. Their experiences are all of the above. So whether the students are identified or perceived, and I want to talk about that for a second, There is as much danger of suicide risk for students who do not identify LGBTQ, but are perceived to be on their campuses. Quick side story, the first high school I worked for in Southern California, the GSA was started by a group of straight females who maybe did not fit the normal conformity of what a female looks like, meaning they wore baggy clothes, they wore their boyfriend's hoodies that were 3 sizes too big for them, and were called names alluding to being homosexual, and they weren't. And they were tired of being bullied because they came to me and said, if I'm being bullied like this and I'm not, I can't imagine the experience for kids who are. So we want it to be safer for us, and we want it to be safer for our classmates. And they're the ones that started the GSA at that school back in 2001. So that perceived thing is very dangerous, and actually, maybe I don't wish to do another dissertation, but I would love to do research on students that turn violent on campus that are LGBTQ related issues, may not actually be LGBTQ identified students, but they're working so hard to fight against that stigma, and they're not even in the community. So a side story on that. So whether they are identified or perceived as LGBTQ, the students that statistically suffer the most in Toledo area schools are these students. They are the most often silent about the words or incidents that they experience in hallways, in classrooms, on the bus, in locker rooms, on campus, walking to school, walking home from school, whatever it may be. The latest National School Climate Survey released by GLSEN, and you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember if you mentioned this, if enough students from one state respond to the survey, GLSEN takes the time and money to pair individualistic statistics for that state. So here in Ohio, it doesn't pare down to county because it's an anonymous survey, it just asks for state. So here in Ohio, again, over 88% of the students in Ohio schools hear homophobic and transphobic language or have witnessed or been a victim of homophobic or transphobic harassment in school. And nearly half of those students either fear reporting or feel like they don't have a place to report. And the other almost half of those students have reported and had nothing happen, no action. So the climate for our students in local schools, however, isn't all negative. There are many schools, we're finding out, that have equality clubs like Gay Straight Alliances. And again, according to the GLSEN survey, it is a significant drop in homophobic and transphobic incidents at school just at the existence of a club. Even if there's only 2 kids in it and it's not very popular, the existence of a club on campus significantly drops harassment and bullying. So there are many schools here with hardworking teachers, administrators, and staff members that stand up and work for equality and equity on their campuses. So we have to support their efforts and give these educators resources to help them continue their work for their most vulnerable students. There are schools where inaction is a problem. So it's time to hold those schools and those districts accountable for the issues that arrive at their doors and they either don't respond or don't know how to respond, or they respond inappropriately. Definitely, as Executive Director of Equality Toledo, I've jumped into some meetings with superintendents, even right outside the city, where there are some really seriously not great things going on, and having to look at those superintendents in the eye and saying, you continue down this path, the next step is legal action. I can't threaten that, but I'm warning you right now. I'm on your side, I'm an educator, but if you continue to this inaction or poor reaction, it's gonna get worse for everybody. In the worst examples, we have students that are being outed to their families before they're ready, or health teachers using outdated references that equate being transgender to being mentally ill. In the best examples, we have principals calling my organization or calling GLSEN Northwest Ohio and asking for help because they are tired of seeing and hearing the daily experience of LGBTQ students in their hallways. And both of those directions, they need more support, they need more guidance, and both those directions need to be held accountable in these districts to making sure that all students are safe at school. There is even a bigger picture issue in Toledo. As far as I can see, and I apologize to the local districts if I am wrong, but I do not believe there is written policy surrounding the safety of LGBTQ students written in any single district. There's no guidance for transgender students in bathroom use. There's no policy for issues that border hate crimes or harassment based on LGBTQ identification. We have to start demanding protection for all students on campuses, not after months and months. These districts, well, we'll meet about it, we'll have a think tank about it. It's gonna take too long. In that time, we're gonna have kids that are gonna hurt themselves, hurt other people, or flat out drop out of school. We're gonna lose students if we continue to let these districts sit back and go, well, we'll meet about it. That's one message. I won't say which district, but there is one really big district in this city that is working to enact bathroom policy and put it in their books by the end of this school year. And I told them it's even more urgent than that. It should be in there tomorrow. Do not let your principals have autonomy on whether or not a student can use a bathroom. It just seems ridiculous. So what, where am I? Yep. So what does this all really mean? The idea is that by taking care of supporting and training educators, holding administrators and districts accountable, and getting them to enact policies to support all students, we'll be helping to lessen the effects of LGBTQ harassment and abuse in schools, which may also fall into the category of bullying. These are ways that we start to address the experiences being reported in our local schools. It is going to take a collective effort from activists, taxpayers, parents, educators, allies, much more than the people represented in this room. Anyone that wants to stop seeing these statistics about LGBTQ youth and suicide, LGBTQ youth and homelessness, and LGBTQ youth and dropout rates. So we have to continue to learn about how to support these efforts and what it means to support these efforts, because it will mean so much to the students that sit silent, afraid, and feel like they're alone every single day. So the real challenge is then, for those of you here tonight or watching on stream, and you're looking for answers and wanting to understand how to support our youth, to take something you've learned tonight and go have the hard discussions with others. Help us handle the difficult task of showing others the urgent importance of the effects of bullying and harassment aimed at LGBTQ students in our schools. We are here at an important night, an important lecture. Rob Salem is probably one of our preeminent speakers in the area, and yeah, he's amazing, so it's gonna be really cool in a few minutes. But you're likely here because you're already interested in this, you're already connected to this. We have a sameness here tonight. If you're watching and streaming, it's because you're already connected into this. And our sameness right now is a problem. Because those that really need to hear this and learn it and embrace it aren't the ones that are gonna come to this or watch this online. Maybe after, when someone makes them. But at least not yet. So I challenge every one of you to take something you've learned and talk about it with coworkers, with classmates, with family, with friends, with strangers on the street. Their organization I used to work for used the term upstander, and I love it, I stole it, I don't even remember what organization it was, but it's time for all of us to be upstanders. Let's commit to starting ripples of LGBTQ knowledge across our schools, our city, and our state. Let's commit to threatening the status quo. Let's commit to standing up in the toughest situations and having the hardest conversations. So let's commit to being heard. I am honored to have been asked to be here tonight to be part of the Voices for LGBTQ Youth. Obviously, or hopefully it's obvious how passionate I am about education and supporting these students, and all students, but definitely these students that sit silent and hurt so much. I'm also happy to unofficially be representing administrators that want to help these students in our schools. There's so much work that's left to be done. There's so many more things that we need to learn, and there's plenty of action that all of us can take in our circles and expanding our circles moving forward. So let's get to the really good stuff. And I think I did that on accident. Sorry, I don't want to break it. So thank you for having me here tonight, and yeah, I'm gonna leave it alone so you can fix it. Thank you.
Let's hope I know how to do this. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I want to thank you for being here with us this evening. And you mentioned so much about the work that needs to be done in our local school systems. And I wanted to highlight that and reference that the Alumni Association not only works hard to provide opportunities for our alumni, but to be advocates for our current U Toledo students and potential future U Toledo students. We want to help educate students that are looking at different institutions to attend that the University of Toledo is a safe, diverse, and inclusive place to attend college. So please help us continue, like you said, continue to push this information out to the masses and help us share that information with our future Rockets. Now, I will admit, earlier today when I was testing the microphone and the technology in here, which I am absolutely terrible with, I struggled getting through all of your committees and the boards and all of the amazing things that our next speaker, Mr. Rob Salem, is a part of. A faculty member with the university since 1994, Mr. Salem teaches clinical courses that provide students with the skills necessary to successfully practice law while advancing the law school's social justice mission. Mr. Salem also works with students on several policy and law reform projects locally and statewide. The projects have addressed issues such as bullying prevention, prisoner reentry, elder law, LGBTQ rights, delivery of criminal defense, and statutory amendments. Now, this is the part that our broadcast services director can laugh about. I almost cut it out because I'm like, I can't even get through all of this. It was so amazing. He serves or has recently served on the board of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio, the Ohio Advisory Committee of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, the board of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, the board of the Toledo Bar Association, the advisory board of the Ohio Drug Assistance Program, the ethics committee of Flower Memorial Hospital, and the National Advisory Board of Equal Justice Works in Washington, D.C. He formerly served as a general counsel for the Ohio ACLU, and we're very excited to say that Mr. Salem was also recently appointed Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Toledo Law School. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rob Salem.
Did you turn on?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you. And it's an honor to be here. I want to thank the LGBT Alumni Affiliate for inviting me to talk tonight. And I like to think I'm important. That's why I have this thing. It's like Madonna. But if I get too close to this, I might experience some feedback. So if that happens, I'll just take this off. So you can tell from my subject, from my topic, that this is going to be somewhat of a downer talk. I hope you didn't expect a stand-up comedy routine. This is going to be a downer. There's a lot of really sad, negative information that I'm going to present tonight, but I think it's important because it's the reality for a lot of our kids. And so what I think I'm going to do is start with talking about the condition of LGBTQ youth in America, because again, that's going to set the foundation for why we have such high suicide risk for this population. Then I'll talk about suicide risk, and then we'll finish off by talking about some of the protective factors that everyone in this room can use to help alleviate the problem, to help these kids through some really tough times. The reason I'm going to spend a lot of time on the condition of this population is because there are so many misconceptions about what LGBTQ youth face and the struggles they face. I think there's a general sense in society that things are better now, things are rosier for LGBTQ youth because, you know, there's broader acceptance of homosexuality in society in general. Surveys reveal that. That's been shown to be true. There are more role models in popular culture, in politics, in sports, in all kinds of leadership posts. So there are more role models. There are more visible LGBTQ people. There are more favorable policies and legislation today than there was 10 years ago. There's marriage equality after all, so you know people think, oh, well, you can get married now, so of course things are better for you. You can't still be experiencing discrimination, right? Because you can get married. Well, that is not true. And so the experience on the ground that LGBTQ kids face, as well as adults, is very different from that perception that I think is so pervasive in non-LGBTQ populations. So we have a lot of work to do. And I think you'll see from the data that I'm going to present that there's still some real challenges to overcome. So let's start by talking about what the size of this population is, because I think there's also a misconception that we're talking about very few people. After all, I talk to adults still who are surprised or shocked that there are LGBTQ youth, that kids can identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. There are still people who believe that. So since we have people that fail to realize that this population exists, it's important to talk about the numbers. The latest Gallup surveys, Gallup does a nice job of tracking this population or these numbers. The latest from 2017 shows that 4.5% of Americans today identify as LGBTQ. Those are adults. And that's up from 3.5% just a few years ago in 2012. So it's a fairly significant increase. That's not too dramatic, but it's fairly significant. But the next figure is what's really significant. 8.1% of American millennials, and these are people who were roughly born in the 80s and 90s, identify as LGBTQ today. And that is up from 5.8% in 2012. That's a significant increase in self-reporting. And what that tells us is that younger populations are more comfortable. There's less stigma among the younger population regarding coming out. So of course it's not completely fine, but people are feeling a little more comfortable coming out. And we're seeing from these surveys that the LGBTQ community is becoming younger, or at least the reported, self-reported LGBTQ community. It's younger, it's more female, for whatever reason. We can theorize about some of that. And less white. So we have, the LGBTQ community is made up of people of color in higher proportion than the general population. Now, we don't even know, we don't have much data on the younger generation, Gen Z. These are the kids in high school and college right now. There's not a whole lot of data coming out, but we can speculate, and experts believe that the numbers are going to surpass 10% easily. So this is going to be a significant population. This surpasses some of our racial and ethnic minorities in this country. But LGBTQ people are still largely invisible because, you know, we're not as identifiable as some other minorities. Okay, so this is a significant population. So, okay, so what are the stressors on specifically LGBT youth? What are some of the challenges? So, in summary, a lot of kids, and let me say also before I talk more about this, we're talking about generalizations here. Okay, we're talking about this is a diagnostic of an entire community. So whenever you do that, you're generalizing. So please understand that there are a lot of really well-adjusted, happy LGBTQ youth. Okay, there are a lot. In fact, the majority of LGBTQ youth are happy and well-adjusted. Okay, what we're talking about here are statistics and generalizations because the community at large has some issues. Okay, so I just want to make that clear before we go on. But these are the main stressors: family rejection, discrimination and harassment, bullying, and I'm sorry to use that term, Annalise, because there's really not a good alternative at this point. So when you use harassment, harassment is a legal term and it encompasses more things than just bullying. So it's really confusing, but so for that reason I'm going to use bullying. And isolation. These are the four main stressors and among others, but these four are the biggies for LGBTQ youth. And what I'd like to do is just kind of go through quickly, because I know we don't want to be here all night, so I'm going to try to run through this as quickly as possible. You've already heard some data presented by the first two speakers, so I'm going to try not to be too redundant. But let's talk about bullying first, one of the stressors. You've already heard the dire statistics, and these numbers are also from the GLSEN survey. About 87% of LGBTQ youth report being bullied, and that's compared to about 27% of all youth in schools. So a real huge disparity, okay? No surprise there. This next figure is very troubling because it suggests a lot of other problems for this community in the future. 35% of LGBTQ youth report skipping school at least once in the last year because of safety concerns. They don't feel safe going to school because of bullying. So what this means is that their academics are going to suffer, of course. The graduation rates will suffer, and the consequences are much longer term. Okay, so bullying is definitely a problem. And I think that some schools are doing great things now. I've been working on bullying prevention now for a couple decades, and I'll tell you, when I first started training teachers on bullying prevention, we couldn't even talk about LGBTQ youth. It was too controversial. My bullying prevention trainings didn't include LGBTQ youth. Today, that's very different. And there are some schools that are implementing great programs, and that's a wonderful thing. But whenever you have a community sort of coming out in such record numbers, gaining, or at least the perception of gaining victories in the political arena and in society in general, there's going to be a backlash. And that's what I think some of the bullying that we're seeing today is attributed to. There's more visibility among the LGBTQ youth population. People are coming out. Kids are brave. A lot of kids are really brave. They're coming out, they're more visible, therefore they're targeted more. So we're seeing the numbers remain relatively flat. Whereas you'd think that it would be getting better, but it's really not getting better. Okay, discrimination is the other stressor. Discrimination and harassment. Remember, LGBT people in general face discrimination. It's still happening, even though there's marriage, it's still happening. Only 21 states prohibit discrimination in employment, public accommodations, and housing. That means 29 states don't. And Ohio is one of those 29 states. So if I'm an employer in Ohio and I have an employee who's gay and I tell her, hey, look, I just found out you're gay. I don't want gays working for me. You're fired. That is perfectly legal in Ohio. Okay? That's not considered unlawful discrimination in Ohio. So when people tell you, oh, discrimination is no longer a big issue, LGBT people are, they got it made now. I mean, look, there's Will and Grace, and we have Pete Buttigieg running for president. Don't believe them. It's still pretty bad. Let me say a little bit about school and discrimination in school. Only, I think, 20 states have passed legislation that specifically enumerates LGBTQ kids in their safe school legislation. So again, that's 30 states that have opted to specifically exclude LGBTQ kids from the safe school legislation. Okay, who is most impacted by school policy in our society? LGBT kids are, and yet they're specifically excluded in 30 states. That's a problem. Criminal justice. The Williams Institute out of UCLA has done some great work around this. 60% of incarcerated girls and young women are sexual minorities. 60%. Okay, why is that? It's not because lesbians and bisexual women and transgender women have more criminal intent than the society in general. You got to ask yourself, why is it that 60% of incarcerated girls are sexual minorities? LGBT kids in general are 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than non-LGBT kids. And if you're a young man or boy in jail, you are 11 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than heterosexual or straight boys and young men. There's a lot of discrimination in the criminal justice system too. These are big stressors. So we have bullying, we have discrimination, isolation is a third stressor on this community. Social and emotional isolation. So, social isolation is when there are a lot of external factors that contribute to the isolation. So you're rejected by your family, you're rejected by your peers, you become more isolated because of that rejection. Whereas emotional isolation is more self-imposed, when your self-esteem is low because you're afraid to come out, you're not happy with yourself, you're self-loathing, you fear coming out. So you're engaged in emotional isolation. These are very, very harmful behaviors, and it leads to things like this. 42% of LGBTQ youth say that their community is not accepting. Well, that's a big percentage of this population that says that they are not accepted in their communities. LGBTQ youth are more likely to report feeling sad or hopeless compared to non-LGBTQ youth. 60% to 26%, that's from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. Only 37% of LGBTQ kids report being happy, compared to 67% of non-LGBTQ kids. And nearly 30% of LGBTQ youth report not even having one adult that they can talk to confide in. A third cannot talk to an adult. They don't have anybody in their lives. That's isolation, and that's a major stressor. This is the biggie, the fourth stressor, family rejection. The Human Rights Campaign conducted a survey just last year, and one of the questions was, what are the most important problems in your life? And they asked this of LGBTQ kids and non-LGBTQ kids. And look at this, and this is so sad. For non-LGBTQ kids, their three top problems that they identified were classes, exams, grades, college, career, their professional life, and financial pressures, okay? For LGBTQ kids, what are they worried about? Their families rejecting them, bullying at school and school safety, and the fear of what will happen when they come out. That's a lot of stress on kids, okay? A lot. The other question that they asked was, what would you like to change about your life? For non-LGBT kids, they said, I want more money. Now, this is not to denigrate non-LGBT kids, okay, because they have struggles too. All young people have struggles. But these were the responses. They'd like more money and a reduction of debt. They would like to change their appearance, specifically their weight, and they would like some improvement in their mental health. A lot of depression in the young communities. What did the LGBTQ kids say? They want understanding and tolerance. They want to be accepted. They want their parents and family to accept them. And they want to change where they live and who they live with. Okay? Again, paints a really sad picture of these kids. LGBTQ youth from highly rejecting families, and I think you heard this already today, are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than LGBTQ kids from supportive or relatively supportive families. They're almost 6 times as likely to report high levels of depression. They're more than 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs or illicit drugs. And they're more than 3 times as likely to be at risk for HIV infection and other sexually transmitted diseases. This is the difference between kids from highly rejecting families and kids from relatively supportive or accepting families. And a couple of things that are related to family rejection that I think are really important to mention. Conversion therapy. People think this doesn't exist. It exists a lot more than you think, including electroshock therapy in some parts. So these are things that kids are still going through. They're still experiencing this because their families force them to go into conversion therapy. This is extremely harmful, physically and psychologically, and it's been discredited by every single mental health professional organization, including the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association. But it still happens. And that's why you're seeing more attention given to it. I think currently only about 16 states have passed bans on conversion therapy. So we still have a long way to go. In Ohio, I think all the big cities have passed conversion therapy bans, including Toledo. So this is an issue that's getting more attention now. Another big consequence of family rejection is homelessness. According to the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ. 40%, and this was backed up by the Williams Institute. So this is what happens when families reject. And obviously, if you're homeless, you're not going to be in school. You're not going to be taking care of your health, physical or emotional. You're going to get sick. You're going to be at much higher risk of sexually transmitted disease, specifically HIV, in some communities. And this is just, I think these figures are alarming. So, okay, those are the 4 stressors. Again, bullying, isolation, discrimination, and family rejection. So what are the effects of these stressors? There are a lot of effects, but here are some that really impact this population we're talking about. Mental health issues, physical health issues, substance abuse, violence, scholastic issues, and then finally suicidal ideation, which I'll talk about in a little more depth. But let's go through briefly just some of these stressors. Mental health issues. LGBTQ kids are more than twice as likely as non-LGBT people to have mental health issues in their lifetime. And they're 2.5 times more likely, something happened. Yeah, you knew that would happen, right? Of course. Yes.
Did I say something happened?
So maybe now I can do my song and dance routine, my stand-up comedy. There we go. Thank you. Is it something I did?
No.
Okay, good. Good, as long as it's not my fault. 2.5 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, substance abuse compared to non-LGBT kids. Other consequences, physical health issues. So there's a whole bunch of data out there on the disparities in mental health and physical health between LGBTQ and non-LGBTQ kids. So this is just a snapshot. I just pulled out a few statistics that I thought were really interesting and alarming. Gay and bisexual boys and young men account for 8 out of every 10 new HIV transmissions. Okay, and that's still happening. About 28% of transgender women are HIV positive. There are higher rates of STDs as documented by the CDC over and over again. There are higher rates of eating disorders and body image disorders. There are higher rates of smoking and substance abuse. Basically, every health and mental health outcome, negative health and mental health outcome, LGBTQ kids suffer more than non-LGBTQ kids. The other consequence is substance abuse, higher rates of substance abuse across the board for LGBTQ youth. In fact, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association reports that LGBTQ youth have 20 to 30% higher rates of substance abuse than non-LGBT youth. Violence is the other consequence. This population is much more vulnerable to violence. 10% of these kids have reported being threatened or injured by a weapon at school. A lot of hate crimes still are reported against this community. The FBI reports about 18%. This is just from last reporting cycle. The CDC reports that 46% of bisexual women and girls have been raped. Okay, 46%. 61% of youth report feeling unsafe in their communities, according to the Center for Disease Control. Nearly half. Okay, so violence is a big issue, a major consequence of these stressors. And scholastic issues. According to the National School Climate Survey, again, about 35% of these kids report missing school at least once in the past month because they feel unsafe. And they're much more likely to skip school, much less likely to graduate and have other academic problems. So this brings me to the last consequence, which is suicide and suicidal ideation. And before I talk more about this, I just want to offer some disclaimers. This is a very touchy subject, and we must talk about it responsibly, because there's popular culture, the media, they like to talk about suicide as if being LGBTQ is a risk factor in and of itself. It is not. Okay, being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or queer is not in and of itself a risk factor. What is a risk factor, what are the risk factors, are the multiple ways that society treats these kids. That's what creates the risk factor. Okay, so we have to avoid the temptation to think, oh my God, my grandchild or my son or my nephew, my daughter has come out as gay, now they're at higher risk for suicide. That is not necessarily the case. The vast majority of LGBTQ kids never contemplate suicide. But LGBTQ kids are at higher risk for a lot of reasons, which I'll talk about. The other thing that I want to talk about regarding this issue of speaking responsibly about it is that there is the possibility of suicide contagion. So when one risk factor, a specific, very acute risk factor of suicide is when you know somebody else that's been close to you that's committed suicide, and when it's not handled properly. There's something that we call suicide contagion, and that's why you see a rash of suicides happening in the same school community sometimes, because there are copycats. And we have to talk about this issue responsibly so we can avoid contagion, we can avoid the inaccurate perception that being LGBTQ is in and of itself a risk factor. Okay, so what are the risk factors? There are a lot. I pulled out these though, because these relate mostly to what we're talking about tonight. Mental illness is a risk factor, substance abuse, access to weapons, a family history of suicide, abuse as a child, discrimination and harassment, and family rejection or lack of support. Again, being LGBTQ is not a risk factor, okay? Let's talk about some of these statistics. Suicide in general is the second leading cause of death among young people 10 to 24. But for LGBTQ youth, they're 3 to 5 times more likely to have seriously considered or attempted suicide. 44% of these kids have seriously considered suicide in high school at some point, compared to only 15% of non-LGBTQ kids. That's a huge disparity. The likelihood of death by suicide is up to 7 times greater than for LGBTQ youth than non-LGBTQ youth, and suicide attempts by these kids are 4 to 6 times more likely to result in injury that requires medical treatment. What that says is that when LGBTQ youth try to kill themselves, they really try, okay? They're serious about it, and they're often more successful. LGBTQ youth from highly rejecting families are 8.4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers from supportive families, which I've already mentioned. For transgender youth, specifically, it's even worse. According to the Transgender Equality Project, 92% of transgender people report having attempted suicide at some point before the age of 25. So we're talking about youth here. 92% of transgender people, okay? So what are the protective factors? How can we help even in our own small way? Well, these are the major protective factors. These things, if they exist, will help a lot of LGBTQ youth, sexual minorities, get through the tough times, overcome the risk factors, and lead healthy, productive lives. Good relationships with parents, even one parent. Okay, it's really important. You parents out there, even if it's just you, the research shows that single parents, just a good relationship with even one parent, even if the relationship with the other parent is really bad, it's a major protective factor. Feeling safe and supported at school. is another protective factor. Inclusion in social groups and overall school environment helps a great deal. Family cohesion is really important, and having positive relationships with adults outside of the immediate family, and having a confidant or a good friend that you can talk to. So some of these things are beyond everybody's control, but you can see that there are some things that all of us can do to, in our own small way, to help people that we know of, and be open to helping people. Because it could just be that one relationship that a young kid has that makes all the difference in the world. You being a mentor, being a confidant to somebody you know in your community, a neighbor's child, a friend's child, a student, that can make all the difference in the world. So what needs to happen? Obviously, we need to raise awareness. We need to keep talking about these issues. We need to train educators and parents on what they can do. And you've already heard about what schools can do specifically. And I really think it's important to promote GSAs in schools, because the research that you heard about regarding how effective they are in reducing incidents of bullying and suicidal ideation, that's accurate, and it's really important. So GSAs do wonders. And that's something specific everybody can work on in their school communities. Enacting strong bullying policies, of course. Working with schools to create a welcoming environment. Every school can do better. Okay, using terminology, proper terminology is one thing. Having gender-neutral restrooms is another thing. Work to promote equality and inclusiveness locally, statewide, and nationally. So politics, I think we can't underestimate the benefit of living in a society that makes it clear that we're welcome. So when we know, like in some of Western European countries that are way far more advanced than we are in this area, like the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, where policies are so favorable toward LGBT people, incidents of depression and suicidal ideation are much lower, and violence are much lower for those communities there than they are here, okay? And make therapy and crisis services more accessible to youth. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of referral sources. So, like if you have to call a crisis hotline, mostly you gotta still pick up a phone. There are other ways to deliver those services for people in need. And maybe, I'm no techie, so I'm not going to give you suggestions. But social media can play a real positive role here. So that's basically all I've got, and I can't believe I ended on time, which leaves time for questions. And by the way, I'm so glad that you asked me to do this, and because this program, so it's important because obviously we're talking about a very vulnerable community, but it's not the only vulnerable community within the LGBT community. We also need to have these programs for LGBTQ people of color. We need to have these programs specifically for the transgender community. We need to have these programs for the aging and elderly LGBTQ community. These are all vulnerable subgroups under the umbrella of LGBTQ. And I love the idea of doing this more as a series, Samantha. So consider that. Not me all the time, I don't want to speak all the time. But I mean, having more of these programs would be a great service, I think. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. Does anybody have a question?
I do have a lot.
I was afraid. Yeah.
I have a question. Thank you all so much for your. Sorry.
Yeah.
If I go there.
You can come down here because you're going to speak next.
Look at me so confused. It threw me off. So thank you so much. I learned an incredible amount. It's incredibly informative, incredibly moving. And I hope all of us leave here sort of inspired out of the daunting statistics and the reality that we live in, but inspired to make a change and do something, even if it's something small in our local communities, as you said, Rob. I do have a question, though, about the training. All of you mentioned training for faculty, staff, and administrators, and I'm not sure what that looks like because I have never been in the classroom, in a K through 12 classroom. So my question is sort of this, and I have it on 3 different pages because as you each spoke, I think I built on the question. Our staff, and this may depend on state, may depend on school district, I don't know, but our staff and faculty administrators, are they required to undergo regular diversity training that includes specifically for LGBTQ students? I'm already seeing heads shake no, so that's an easy question. And then I guess, are there states or districts in your research where you have witnessed personally or you have heard about or read about that do productive trainings that really empower faculty, staff, and administrators in dealing with LGBTQ youth? And what was that training like, if you know, and what needs to be included in that? Because here's my problem. I think even at the university level, and my just exposure and doing various things, this gets very generic, right? So even if it's mentioned about LGBTQ youth and what we should do, it's sort of a PowerPoint slide and it's moved on in these trainings, you know, and there's nothing really tangible or meaningful that comes from it. It's just a way to say, oh, look, our school district does address it. Mm-hmm. So I was just curious if you're aware through GLSEN maybe, or through anything of diversity trainings that we could take to our own communities and say, here's good examples.
It's a great question, so and then if you guys want to jump in as well. I will say GLSEN is, I'm trained through GLSEN. I'm certified to be a trainer for teachers through that organization for my time that I served as the co-chair of Southern Nevada. And I know, if you didn't know this, our GLSEN chapter here in Northwest Ohio was just accredited this October. They're doing incredible work to get jump-started, and I believe are about to go through all the trainings that I went through a bunch of years ago in Nevada, though they get the newer ones, so I'm kind of jealous. So that's a multifaceted, multi-layered response, and the general is, we know that for any stigmatized subject area, education tends to, here's a presentation, we move on. So what GLSEN has tried to do is create series, and any of you who are educators now, either watching or here, GLSEN.org, I think, .org, it's been a long time. GLSEN.org has free resources for educators, including lessons that include LGBTQ people or issues, and it's integrated in regular Common Core-based lesson plans, and they're free. So you go on, register as an educator, and they just have, by grade level, by subject area, they have math lessons on there on how to integrate LGBTQ inclusive language in math. So there's some really great things that are available. So it's 2 sides. You have a school that might have me or GLSEN come in and do a training. Those tend to be really great because we work to kind of open the door, like, here's the time to ask the questions. So I've received a lot of really open questions, you know, what happens if a kid does this? In fact, I co-teach an Intro to Education on the main campus right now, and we had a Q&A on just yesterday in one of the classes where one of the students said, what happens if a kid comes up to me and comes out because I don't know how to handle that? So we're training the teachers now on how to address these issues. But it does have to be more than singular presentation, here's the information, and go. And so the districts and the schools that are positive with this, they start a GSA, they incorporate it. It really comes down to your administrators. It really comes down from the top level leadership in the school on holding other teachers accountable. And that was a big thing at the school I taught in North Las Vegas. So in North Las Vegas, I was in a school that was 92%. We were Title I, so we were 92% free and reduced lunch. we were about 48% Hispanic or Latino and about 42% African American. So it was majority minority at this school. We were able to build a more inclusive environment at that school with just year after year after year after establishing the GSA. And I'll tell you, we had protests. We did Day of Silence. We had a church protest us. We did continue to do Day of Silence and do a whole Pride Week leading up to the Day of Silence, just like they do Homecoming Week. But we did every day was, one day was Rainbow Day, next day was No Hate Day, one day. So just by having administrators support this, the teachers didn't need more training, but they also needed to support it at the level that I may or may not have gotten a teacher removed from the school because I caught him numerous times tearing down GSA posters. So this was a relatively new campus, so lucky for me, there were cameras in the hallways. They saw it happen over the course of days, and that teacher, I don't know if he lost his job, but I know he was no longer on our campus that year. So it takes an administrator to be willing to have that hard conversation. But it does need to be repetitive, it does need to be supported, and that's where organizations like us or advocates like Rob come in and do more than just that singular training. So the TPS school that I went into just 2 months ago, supported them in doing, there's GLSEN supports a week called No Name Calling Week and Anti-Bullying Week. So we sent some supports to them to run that for the first time on their campus. And now it's in a training of their teachers, and now I'll be going back into that school by the end of the year to just have an open conversation with the teachers. Did you notice a change in your hallways? How did this week go? And then in the fall, redoing the training again. So it takes that principal who called and said, I'm tired of this, to enact that consistent training. And even at the university level, I have dug a little bit into UT's diversity stuff, and I can tell you that most of the staff members that I've met said they went to a training a number of years ago, and they don't remember who did it, they don't remember anything about it, but they got a really pretty safe space sticker to put on their doors, and can't describe one thing about it. So, not to knock on UT, but having it once every so many years is not enough. And I think we know that and we support that, and that's why organizations like mine exist. So I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to that.
To address the couple things that I see as happening in the Toledo area. We see a lot of teachers actually coming to us saying, we need some type of training. We know we have gay students, we know we have trans students, we don't even know the vocabulary to use. So they come to us and say, how can you support us? I had a teacher come over the summer and we discussed hopefully her getting some training in her school, and she sent me a text today and said, we have some mandatory training at the end of this school year. There are 45 sessions that we can choose from. One of them has the letters LGBTQ on them, and I have never seen those letters together in this district. So that was a positive. But I really do feel like it's a lot of times the classroom teachers that are coming and saying we need this. Personally, I had experiences in the school district where I was teaching that my students wanted their teachers to understand them a little bit more. I happened to be teaching a program, and I actually had 5 LGBTQ students that were in the program that year. And so we worked with you with the grant money and worked with you on the anti-bullying policy, which they didn't end up doing, by the way. And we put together this beautiful presentation. My students did it and said, here, we want to present that, and we were told no. But then they realized that they were having a transgender student that would be attending the high school the next year, And then they came knocking at our door saying, please come and teach this class. So it was a training that my students made to just tell the teachers how they can be more affirming and welcoming in the classroom. And they made up their own safe space stickers to give the teachers. So just finding a lot of that at the classroom level. But GLSEN does have excellent training, and we are going to, they have a 1-hour training and then a 3-hour, 4-hour all-day training that we can do. But I can't do that till the summer because I haven't been trained yet. So go ahead, Rob.
If I could just add just a couple things about training. I used to work with Dr. Susan Teljohn from the Education Department and at the University of Toledo, Education, Health and Human Service. I don't remember her department. But what we required of every training we did was that every adult in the school had to attend for us to go train. Because a lot of the people that need training most are the cafeteria workers, the bus drivers, the custodians, the coaches. Not to knock on coaches, but there are always the ones in the corner with their arms folded, giving us dirty looks. So that's one thing that's essential for trainings. And then also there are survey instruments that can be given to schools in advance because every school is different. And so some schools might need to tailor their anti-bullying programs specifically to the needs of their community. And we found that some schools, there were a lot of, the problem was that the bullying occurred outside of the school before the school bell rang and the doors open. And that's where the bullying occurred mostly, is outside when there was no adult supervision. That was the only time the school didn't have adult supervision. It was a relatively easy fix. Not that they cured all the problems, but they were able to assign an adult to supervise that area before school. So I would consider that. And we have, and Dr. Susan Teljohn from the University of Toledo, who's now retired, has a nice, reliable survey that I'm sure she would be happy to share with anybody who's interested. She's going to kill me for this, but that's true. Are there any other questions or? Okay.
Thank you all for coming. I know you're anxious to get out and enjoy some more popcorn. Please take some popcorn home. It's delicious. Ryan, I apologize for putting you on the spot a moment ago, but I wanted to quickly introduce one of our UT alums that is truly making my life so much easier. He is the president of the LGBTQA plus alumni affiliate, and he's here to share a little bit of information about our initiatives. Yes, we want to do more programming. We want to do more educational experiences such as this and really provide more opportunities for our alumni to connect. There's some really great things coming up in the future and some really great ideas. And I would like to introduce to you Ryan Wright, who's going to share a little bit of information about that.
According to my watch, we are 3 minutes from 7:30, so I'm not going to keep you any longer than we promised. So I just want to thank you so much for coming, each and every one of you. Thank you. I just want to briefly introduce the affiliate and just say that I hope that you get involved. We're the newest affiliate here at U Toledo, and we have an executive board formed, and we have people regularly attending our meetings. Yes, some of you are here. And so we are excited, and we have the full support of U Toledo, and we have the full support of the Alumni Association, and as you know, that's huge. This has been years in the making, and so we're thrilled, and we are motivated, and we are excited, and we want you to be a part of it. So please, if you're at all interested and you're an alumni, reach out to us, give me your name, email, I'll contact you. But, and that includes anybody who is watching via online. If you want to be involved in any way or contribute, we would be happy to discuss and, begin that communication. As Samantha said, we do have a couple things coming up. On June 6th, we have a social event. It's going to be an outdoor barbecue. And so it's just a way for us to sort of hang out, get to know each other, and again, invite more people to participate. That'll be at the Alumni Pavilion. So please, again, make sure that you're on our listserv, and if you're not getting our emails, then again, just contact us, or I'll be around afterwards, and I'll be happy to make sure that you're on that. And then I think I do want to mention, and this is the part that's maybe not so fun for me, but necessary. We are having a crowdfunding campaign, and so going on, and I think there's a little over 60 days, so a little over 2 months left. And so please contribute as little or as much as you can, because if you enjoyed tonight's program, and Rob proposed a great idea in having this as a series, but any additional educational programming and networking events that we want to hold, that's possible because of the generosity from you all and others who are not here to contribute to financially contribute to our alumni affiliate. And with that, and in saying that, tomorrow, April 18th, is Give Out Day, which is the only national day of giving for the LGBTQ community. So it seems very fitting that I get to encourage you to donate tomorrow. But please do, please do. And I just encourage you to donate to us, but also to other LGBTQ organizations that you are passionate about. Please give, again, as little or as much as you can. One last note that I want to make is that Dr. Sharon Gaber, who is the president of University of Toledo, in her State of the University address, mentioned fueling tomorrows. And that came to me as I thought about today earlier, as I drove here and as I listened to you all. And through donations and through your participation, your support of any way, I see this as a mantra for us as the alumni affiliate. Because we have really seen ourselves as a way to connect alumni, the student community, and the larger Toledo community. And so I want to take this spirit and what we heard today from you all, and again, thank you so much, that we need to help to continue and begin fueling the tomorrows of LGBTQ students. And for us as the alumni affiliate, that is future and current and past Toledo students. So let's carry that, and let's fuel tomorrows for our community. With that, I would be remiss if I did not, help me please, in thanking Samantha Marshall for all that you have done to make this event possible. So thank you. And thank you for those of you who are part of the alumni affiliate for making this possible, because without you all, this would not have existed, and in future programming and et cetera. So this alumni affiliate would not exist. So thank you so much for your participation. Again, I encourage you to get involved, even if that means you want to be on our committee, on our affiliate, or that just means attending events and you want to know when they're happening. Just make sure that you speak to us and you are on our listserv and our email list. And if you have any questions, again, I'll be around. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And with that, enjoy some refreshments. Stick around for a little bit. And I'm ending 2 minutes over, so I apologize. But thank you so, so much. And let's fuel the tomorrows of our LGBTQ students.